regional towns are really Triple J dominated. I feel like in the bigger regional towns, live original music is so far down the list of things that people are looking for. Like, I think there's work, I think there's footy, I think there's access to culture, or like the want to, or the want to see anything but beyond the bloke playing Hotel California in the corner. And often it is the really, really small towns where there's 150 people in that town. So you put a concert on, and everyone in that town knows that there's something going on. And so everyone in that town knows, so then nearby towns will know as well. But then if you go to like a bigger town like Wagga Wagga or like a big regional town, um, you're lost. Like there's no point putting on bands. There's no chance. Is what unless you're like I don't know, fucking Jet or the Angels or whatever. In Geelong called K Rock last year,
Yeah,
um,
okay.
which was funny. It was like a full drive show on full commercial radio, like Geelong commercial radio. It was just a funny how that came to be. And then a mate and I were we were doing demos and stuff at one stage, and like there was heaps of great momentum going forwards for this show. It was like one of those moments where it was like, this is our ticket out of here, baby. There were like cool people involved, and it was like things were going really well. It just there was momentum, and then it just fell off a cliff. It was showbiz, man. So I just it's never quite. Yeah, and then I wanted to do this idea called Death by a Thousand Deep Cuts, where you looked at one hit wonders, like maybe I really liked Australian one hit wonders in particular, like not necessarily one hit wonders, but bands that are really known for one song. Like Rip It Up by 28 Days. Like they got some other songs, but that's the iconic track. And then you kind of listen to the album that iconic song lives on. You kind of gotta see if there's more to the band. Like maybe they're unfairly treated as a one hit kind of wonder. Maybe there's more to the band, or maybe it's like, no, 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 that was the fucking one. So I was going to be called Death by a Thousand Deep Cuts, and you had to listen to the record like three times across the week and voice memo your experience, like as you're slowly probably losing your mind. Um, but couldn't be fucked ultimately.
I'd also imagine that being, on radio, you've got, hey, I'm a musician, I've got a song coming out. Let's just hit this towards the music director at the station and get us played on commercial radio.
Oh, there was never going to be a chance of that. I mean, K Rock was like, I mean, K Rock actually had a really bizarre playlist. It would be like, I mean, in those days, pre-cancellation, but it would be like, I'll be missing you, P Diddy, into like, Mrs. Robinson, the Lemonheads, into like Vance Joy, into like Kendrick Lamar. I don't know, it's fucking all over the shop. It was kind of good because, like listening to a station like that, and all of a sudden, like Mrs. Robinson, Lemonheads comes on, you're like, nice. But then it comes on again, and you're like, oh yeah. And then again, you're like,
Yeah.
whoa,
Okay.
that's a lot of that.
All right. Okay. All right. Okay. That's good. That's good. It's enough slices.
But it was a cool playlist. It had a bit of everything. Like then the Eagles would come on, and yeah. So it
Do
wasn't.
you
It was kind of neither here nor there.
Do you remember, Eamon, that song that Pete played on Coast FM? So, for context, we used to do a radio show on Coast FM. It was very 60s, 70s, and 80s. And the station manager at the time was also doing a shift on breakfast. And he played a song. It was around 8 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't Gangster's Paradise, but it was something of that equivalent.
And Pete was in his
Do you remember-
80s. You know what I mean? It was just not
Yeah,
what
that's-
not what you think of being in his wheelhouse, and he just
Yeah,
rolled
he's
out
a
with that at
Coolio
8 in
fan.
the morning. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very much like that. Like I wouldn't be surprised if they shared a playlist, maybe because I reckon there could have been a bit of Coolio Gangsters Paradise. Um, and I don't know who the music director was. I actually saw Coolio at he played at the first Falls Festival I ever went to. It was Coolio into Muffin Plutonic.
That's pretty cool.
We'll never fade like your jeans would. Muffin Plutonic, and you know that we're heaps good. You ain't sick, boy. You just seem crook. Muffin Plutonic, and you know that we're heaps good. We're playing a festival soon with The Herd, which
Oh,
is epic. up your way, up in well, Newcastle, near Maitland.
What's the
Gumball.
festival?
You know Gumball?
No, but that sounds unreal if the Herd are playing.
And Peep Temple, man. It's fucking it's a beauty. It's gone for been going for 20 years. I've always wanted to play Gumball Festival, but this lineup's sick. Peep Temple, Delivery, us, Ripple Effect, Herd, fucking Ben Lee.
He's so
wicked.
like for an artist of like his legacy in the Australian landscape, he's still giving back as much as he can towards grassroots musicians. I saw he had a video the other day. He was, I don't know, some bumfuck nowhere country town, and he was playing at like an old
Saw that too, yeah.
in Grenfell, New South Wales, at an old cordial factory. Check out how sick this venue is. This is the exterior. This is the street it's on. This kind of venue is exactly why I love playing regional shows. You would not find a spot like this anywhere else in the world. Man, touring regionally is one of the gifts of being an Aussie musician.
Yeah, it's a little bit flawed what he's saying in some ways, but it's a beautiful sentiment. But I did see that. But then I did think Ben Lee is a household name, whether you like it or not. Like in Australian music, like he's just a known quantity. So he has the ability to go to a country town like that, and people, X amount of people will know him, and then they'll tell the other X amount of people in that town, and he can charge a $60 ticket for 80 people, and that's a great earn for Ben Lee. And so for somebody like him, touring regionally is a great thing to do with their time. If you and that's deserved. Getting to a level where you can do that, fucking oath. And a lot of people don't do it, and it is really special for everyone, for the artist and for the punter. But most artists that would try and tour regionally, I've done a fuckload of it. It ain't like that. Like I've taken Pissed Idiots and Press Club into different South Australian towns for $20 a ticket, and you got people complaining about the $20, going, "Who's Pissed Idiots and who's Press Club?" And it's like, what are we doing here? This is we're losing the fight. So yeah, it is a beautiful sentiment, but I don't think it's quite representative.
Sorry, what's the Press Club connection?
I mean, they're old friends of ours, and Greg records most of our shit, but including the last album, Greg who plays guitar in Press Club. But I run a tour called Guts Touring. It used to be called Up the Guts. And it's been going since 2016 was the first one. We went from Hobart to Darwin with like Scott and Charlene's Wedding and Scott Dracula. In the second year, we did the same thing again with Loose Tooth, Neighbourhood Youth, and Dumb Punts. And then in 2021, we did one in Victoria. Basically, it's just like very regional touring, like fucking regional touring. And then in 2021, we just did like Victoria with like Amel and the Sniffers of Bad Dreams and Floodlights and Birds and Camp Cope. And then in 2022, we did 2.5 weeks in Arnhem Land with Bad Dreams and Black Rock Band, 2 weeks in South Australia with Pissed Idiots Press Club, 2 weeks in Victoria with like Children Collide and Body Type, a few others, and then a couple of shows. It was 4 shows in Tassie with Grogan's Teen Jesus, and the Littles went on that one as well. So yeah, and then now it's gotten much smaller, so it's just really remote touring, part of a charity I run called Bush Music Fund, which works with First Nations artists from remote parts of the country. And now Guts is just very remote. So last year we did 2 weeks in Central Australia with Floodlights and James Range Band. And then this year, funding pending, we'll go again back in the Northern Territory for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, cool. Sorry, that's a lot to unpack there. And I look forward to do it. And I look forward to doing that. But the reason I asked the initial question, because we had a recurring joke on our previously mentioned radio show about the Battle of the Clubs, because there was Polish Club, Bread Club, Press Club, like there are a bunch of band names which had club attached to it, and we had a little recurring joke about trying to find the best club, like the Battle of the Clubs per se.
Yeah, far out. That's a good question. Who are some other clubs?
There's a fair few of them. You don't want to go too deep, because every time you figure out a new club, you're just going, shit, how do we work this out now?
Polish Club and Press Club are the one that spring to mind, eh? I think they even toured together, didn't they? But maybe Press Club supported Polish Club.
The shoe fits like it's a tour that's already written.
Yeah.
But we are interested though. Like that's super interesting. Your regional touring reflection, and we kind of just meandered into this conversation. But we are with Jack Parsons of the Pretty Littles, and we will speak about your music. We promise. Very excited to chat about your new album, Force. But your experience touring regionally, what do you like? If I can go way back to the point where you kind of go to regional towns with bands that maybe aren't household Australian names. What do you put that down to, that kind of dissatisfaction or disinterest or lack of curiosity among people? And I will say your music is very good at putting a mirror up to Australia. And having seen that side of Australia, what is your reflection on kind of what the go is there, that kind of lack of curiosity for new music, at least in regional areas?
It's multifaceted, I reckon. So there are a couple of things. So towns are really Triple J, regional towns are really Triple J dominated. Historically is what I found. And this is, I've got to take the East Coast out of it because I think the East Coast actually has a really good regional scene. And I think bands can tour relatively well from, say, Canberra to Brisbane. Like, I just reckon that you could pull off 5 to 7 shows, Kembla and Sydney and or Wollongong and Newcastle and where you guys. I just feel like you could do that on the East Coast, and particularly like a certain type of artist. I reckon like the East Coast has a pretty, maybe not Sydney and Brisbane. You could take it out, but I feel like those coastal places have there's a sound, and whether you want to say sticky fingers or whatever, but there's definitely like a surf rock thing which seems to connect a lot on the East Coast. So I think those bands are all right, but everywhere else, I feel like Triple J is really dominant. I feel like in the bigger regional towns, live original music is so far down the list of things that people are looking for. Like, I think there's work. I think there's footy. I think there's the local pub. I think I just think there are like so many things that are in front of some kind of like access to culture or like the want to or the want to see anything but beyond the bloke playing Hotel California in the corner. And that's like a generalization. There are a lot of smaller towns that do have a cultural thing going on. And often it is the really, really small towns where, say, we went to Marlow, which is Far East Gippsland, where the Snowy River meets the sea, and there's 150 people in that town. So you put a concert on, and everyone in that town knows that there's something going on. And so everyone in that town knows, so then nearby towns will know as well. But then if you go to like a bigger town, like, I don't know, like, one of those big region, like Shepparton, or you go to Wagga Wagga, or like a big regional town, you're lost. Like there's no point putting on bands. There's no chance. Unless you're like, I don't know, fucking Jet or the Angels or whatever, or something like who are those rappers? Bliss and Esso, like that. Those kinds of bands will be fine. So yeah, it's just it's one of those things. I think like sometimes you're going to be playing in too big a town, you just get lost, and it's very depressing. And then you just get those magical places in the smaller towns, and somebody like Kim Churchill finds those places really well, and you kind of create a tour route. You do your own research, and you can really find places to play and places to build audiences. So it's possible, but I think doing it independently is the way to do it. Running it, being the person running the tour, is just fucking loss. But I
Yeah.
think it's sad. Like back in the old days, like when I first started going to see music in Victoria, you'd see a band like Bascoira or Little Red or the Fumes or all those Mess Hall, those types of bands. They'd go Geelong, Barwon Heads, Torquay, Warrnambool, and Ballarat. Like there'd be 5 shows, just a Victorian regional tour, and they'd all be sick. There'd be between 300 and 500 people each show, and the Littles got just the tail end of all that. We'd go down to Warrnambool a lot, but it just changed. I don't know, something happened, dance music and ecstasy or ice or something. I don't know, something changed.
That was going to be my question about what do you think then, changed as a result of that, whether it is, you said that regional towns are quite Triple J dominant. Maybe the Triple J sound might have evolved a little bit. Maybe it's, the outside influence of TikTok and social media trends and charts, which we've discussed many times on this podcast. And I don't want to go too deep into all of that specifically. But, when it relates to regional touring, is it also a case of, I don't know, you're sort of talking about, Wollongong, Canberra, Newcastle is successful for a regional tour. Is that purely, I mean, obviously population would be a result, but you're also saying the bigger regional towns, you don't have that, there's not a connection or a pull there culturally, potentially. Like, what is the biggest difference you find touring in a Wagga Wagga compared to a Canberra or a Newcastle?
Yeah, I can't explain it. To me, just the East Coast feels more engaged with music. Maybe there's more festivals, young people, there's access. I think you're close to Sydney, you're close to these, you're not far, nothing's that far. Whereas if you're, in a place like Mannum in South Australia, like a border town, or Gambia, like you're sort of nowhere. You're 4 hours from Melbourne, 4 hours from Adelaide. So I think, and
It's
there's not much going on. So I think the East Coast is just a bit different. It's just been my experience, there's just shows in Canberra can work. There are venues, shows in Newcastle. I mean, how many venues are there in Newcastle? There's like 4 or 5 venues you could play, really. Like that's extraordinary. And they're all pretty sick. And and the Cambo shut down, but it didn't matter. Like there's good venues to play. There's that's amazing. That's pretty rare. You wouldn't get that in most places, I don't reckon.
Yeah, that probably is a big part of it. But I'd also think, if you're 4 hours from anywhere and then you hear about this musician coming to your town to tour, I would have thought that as a community you'd go, oh, sick, let's go out and see it, because seeing live music's rare as it can come, as opposed to, in Newcastle, you go, oh, yeah, I went to a live show last week, I'll give this week a miss, or, I don't know. That's another way of looking at it too, I guess.
Totally. I think it's just got to be part of the fabric of your town a little bit. If it is rare, then it's probably more like there's a fucking rodeo coming to town and you can't wait to go. And then there's music attached to that. Like
Yeah.
there's different wants and needs and things that people are interested in. And if there's music coming to town, it better be, Jimmy Barnes and whoever else, or an In Excess cover band or whatever. Like, because that's, people just want to hear stuff they know. They don't want to take a risk. I don't think there's necessarily financial freedom, and I think it is just like interest in other things. So yeah, it's complex because you kind of. I think that's when Guts started. My idea was, oh, if I can just be the one which takes music there, how wonderful! It'll create more opportunities for artists. It'll inspire the people in the town, to the younger crew that might come along to pick up instruments. It will inspire other bands to go there and play. It will create this new touring route, so bands will be able to tour Australia more before heading overseas. So that was kind of like my earnest motivation. I was like, this would be great. It'd be great for artists, because back in the old days, like the 80s and like the late 70s, early 80s, that pub rock scene, Paul Kelly and Joe Giuseppe and the Falcons and the Oils and, Chisel and all these bands, these iconic bands, they were playing every night of the week. Like in Victoria, they'd play, Kew, Abbotsford, Collingwood, St Kilda. They'd just go every night. There'd be something else going on, and they'd tour. They'd just tour hard. That was your trade. It didn't matter if they're 8 people or 80 people or 800 people. You played, you toured, and I think it's so important for bands to do that. But you just, now you can't. You got to think about strategy. You got to think about how often you play. You got to think about over saturation. You got to think about money. How you're going to afford. It's so complex now. So that was what I thought. I was like, this would be great. This would just create some opportunities.
What about taking shows like remote? And what you said, you took bands like Floodlights who just kind of fit that bill really, really perfectly. I can just imagine them playing in the desert remotely, whatever, and their vibe generally. But what's it like taking their bands conversely to remote places like that, connecting with communities that might very, very seldom see music of that scale or of that nature in their communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one. It's less about the music connecting, I think. Like, I don't think there are heaps of crew in the communities, walking away like massive Floodlights fans, like, but not in a bad way. It's just those tours are really about giving a band from the city an amazing experience in remote communities and connecting with people and playing music in amazing spaces and being inspired. And then for the First Nations artists on the tour, they're often really, really, really known throughout the communities in their kind of region. Like we had James Range Band on that Central Australia tour. They're from Wutju, which is sort of 3 hours west of Alice Springs. And then we kind of went in a bit of a circle, sort of a 3 hour circumference, I guess. You're always about that far away from Alice. They were massive. It's like Bieber fever out there for a band like that. Like they've got these huge YouTube numbers and everyone's listening to them and there's family everywhere and all that kind of thing. So it's more for that band to get around and play, which is super rare and not often that does that happen. And then for a band like Floodlights, you play a show in Alice Springs and definitely there are some big fans there, but I think it's less about that in some ways, which is kind of cool as well. Same thing happened with Bad Dreams a couple of years before. There was a Darwin show, like a city show, and of course it's going to be some fans around, but it's I think less people in community are across that, more focused on music, which is relevant to them or family members or in language or whatever.
You're obviously speaking from a lot of experience that you've had in the industry across a lot of years, both as a musician and as obviously someone who's putting on tours and you're working with other bands. Obviously, the Pretty Littles is a band who we're here to talk about as well. You've just dropped your first new album in 5 years, and it's your seventh album as well, dropped right at the end of Feb on the 28th. The album's called Force. You are going on a tour as well, which we can tie into all of this touring conversation. But firstly, tell us about this album.
Yeah, I mean, far out. I sort of never really thought that another one would get made, really. So it's really cool in that way to have another album out. Beyond that, it's amazing to have like the support of a bit of a machine behind it, in our tiny little independent way, but to have sort of Endless Records put it out and community music help out and all of these people help out, really. We've never really had that before. And you can, and even just getting PR involved, and that's why I'm speaking with you guys. So it's just been like a nice thing to do after 5 years, because it was getting so far away from that. It was really just we were kind of over it particularly we'd been going for so long that it was like more like pushing albums off a boat. It was just like, fuck off you go. Let's move on. There was no celebration or acknowledgement. So, and it felt like it wasn't going to happen again. So this album is, it's a bit of a behemoth, and it took so long to make. Like we've been putting songs out that are on it since like 2023. So it's been a long time coming. It was just we had to do it in such a strange way, like drip feeding these songs, playing a couple of shows, getting money together, doing some more recording, finishing songs, writing songs. We're all older, so finding time's more difficult. We live away from each other. It was just a bizarre album to make, and then even the recording, the drummer would get there late. We'd have to build the songs. He'd play last. That is not the way you'd want to do it if you could avoid it. So there are so many things which has made it super challenging. So it's a joy for it to be out.
Yeah, and the end result, I mean, you wouldn't know that there was necessarily that degree of hurdle in the making of it and that doubt, because it's a really, really fantastic body of work. It's got so many elements to it that appear, at least in my interpretation of it, both very personal to you and then also very, very reflective and, as I mentioned before, kind of holding a mirror up to the nation in ways that with such it's such a direct way, I think, which is what you guys have always done so well, that we do hear, but we don't hear, in any kind of popular sense, and I don't mean popular in the terms of people like it. I mean what you hear on radio, what you hear about, and perhaps that is exactly what you're getting at with a lot of your music. Australian Dream being one example of that, which just kind of goes, "Hey, look, we're a bit shit." In my interpretation of it, it's we're a bit shit, but we pretend that we're not, and that's half the problem. And this can of issues that relate to our country get kicked down the generational road, and we never really address them. If that's a correct interpretation.
Spooked like a horse in a passing storm. Look away, be the lovable larrikin. Look away like we have from the beginning. I'm sleepwalking through your Australian dream.
I guess what I'm wanting to ask is, what was the motivation? Because you've got those songs like Force, the title track off the album, which it seems to address particularly cases of, or a case of Indigenous man being killed by police. Then you've got Australian Dream. You've got songs that are very personal to you too. So what made these songs want to be all arranged together in this album?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess those songs were just written in a block, so there isn't necessarily a planned cohesion. I think the songs work well together because they were written around the same part of time, or there is a cohesion to the album which isn't necessarily planned, and it's one of those kind of beautiful things which happens randomly. But um, those songs which are more conceptual, or like Australian Dream or Force, or geez, what else is on the record?
Is it
Big
big
Fuck
big fuck
Small, and
little or big fuck small?
yeah, and those, and even like Darky Gardener, which isn't a song necessarily about me. I think that those songs are more. I think I've always been drawn to those songs, Dondale, and I think it's harder, I think, for me to reflect, and it's always been easier to write about others. Even if I say I, me, it very rarely is. But the story songs have always been, like whether it's the Oils, or Paul Kelly, or Kev Carmody, those songwriters that tell stories. I've always loved the imagery it creates. Like, they've always just stuck with me so much. And when you get inspired by something and you start writing a movie or whatever it is, I love that. That's my favorite thing in the world for book. If you get something from a book and off you go, yeah, that's the goal. I much prefer writing that way. Feels much more. I can believe in it more as well. That sentiment sticks around, where it's a sentiment if you're talking about like a relationship problem or a life problem or whatever. It changes. It can be if you're good at that. Holy shit, that's a great way to connect with people. But for me, I struggle with it, and I often move on from it. So those stories are more meaningful to me. I think if I can find something that affects me to the point of writing about it, then that's the best.
And even sonically, like, there is a cohesion there, but also it's separated quite well throughout the album as well. I found that listening through, like, you may be going for more this style, but then the next track you sort of transition nicely into this, and then you're back over here. Like, there is it's not just the same sound repeated 12 times. It's also not so chaotic that you can't keep up. Like, there is this nice cohesion throughout the album as well, sonically, as well as obviously thematically as well, that you're talking about too.
Yeah. It's funny. Maybe the word cohesion isn't the right one, because it is. We've always had that to an extent. I think definitely there's a flow. Like, I listened to the day it came out. I listened to the album from start to finish, and Australian Dream's a really hard song to follow live because it's connecting really well. It has just connected really well, so it's become a really awesome moment live. Like, really moving to play that song and hear people sing it back. And that's just so unexpected and such a beautiful moment in the set. But it's like a really sad moment for, I think, for a lot of people. And to finish a set on that song would feel strange, like it does with fucking Dondale anyway. But playing that song in the middle of the set and then coming out of that, it's really jarring to then go into some indie rock song or something. Like it's a very hard one to navigate. We're just finding that a little bit. And on the album, I love how it kicks into Pillar of Smoke, because it's just like it's like
Yeah.
a slate clean or something. Like you're just like, okay, we're over here now. Like I just was, and then from Pillar of Smoke, I think it goes into Full Hearts, and I love that as well. So there is a jump around in that kind of. It's all under that umbrella of whatever it is, indie, whatever. I don't know, but it's in under the same umbrella. But it just feels like a flow to it, which I love that.
Yeah, there is like I said, it's
Yeah,
not jarring going from one to the other. It does feel like a natural flow. It's a good word. Sorry, Eamon.
Mm.
You're right. Yeah, what was it? Yeah, it is. It's definitely cohesive in a Pretty Littles kind of way. In terms of those songs that you were drawn to, or the stories that you were drawn to telling, like it's almost a redundant question because obviously this it's important to you. But what is that motivation to go and create a song in that way? Because when you look at kind of, and I don't imagine you're trying to write music to top every chart in the world, but when you look at music now, and you mentioned like the Midnight Oil before, who made music, of a similar nature, but it was chart topping in its day and it was popular and people talked, like in that sense. And now, an 8-minute epic that kind of really lays bare the issues with our country is not the kind of thing you're going to be hearing on K-Rock or whatever the radio station you mentioned before was there. So
Any of them, yeah.
as a musician, I assume, or I would interpret it, you're motivated by the idea of just creating the art and throwing it out there, and obviously it is sticking.
I think for a long time I was, and maybe this is, it happens to a lot of young people in bands, but I think there was a motivation and a goal there to do all the things that Triple J bands were doing, and that was play the festivals that I was going to, and that was to get put on Triple J, which was the radio station I was listening to, and then I think it kind of happened. We started getting just a little taste of festivals, and it was sick. But and we got a song on Triple J, and that was Butte. But it kind of it never really sort of stuck. And so I think, and then as the career albums kind of went on, like the Skeleton Run album was, our most well-known album, maybe up until, and probably the best one until Force, I reckon. But it didn't really kind of get radio stuff, or, we didn't really get many opportunities out of it. So I think despite it being really listened to and connecting widely. So I think at that point, I just sort of, it's my dog there. I think at that point, I just sort of realized that maybe that wasn't a world for us, and it didn't matter. And I also realized I was going to do it anyway. Like, I think that despite not getting the things that I think, it's the ego or whatever it is. Margaret, would you shut up? Margaret Scratcher.
Margaret Scratcher. So good.
So even like, despite getting those things, which was like disappointing and like it would make me feel sad or a bit like a failure or whatever, I just realized I was going to do it anyway. And I think, as I said earlier, those are the songs which mean the most to me. And when I feel that motivation to write, that's like those songs create the most, it's like a fever. Like Dondale was written quick and Force was written quick, and Australian Dream took a long time, but it was so fun to write. So I love those. They're just the most important to me. And I think, like writing them is just, it's just writing them for writing them's sake. It's like, there's something there, and I want to write about it. And that's become the most important thing. And then, the band's kind of just, it for our little band, it's connecting with our little audience, and that's a nice thing.
It is art, and it's music that we need. Like, it's important, it's powerful, and it connects, and it resonates too. And I suppose, I mean, you'd rather connect with your community, your Pretty Littles community, on such a deep level, whereas like, I heard Australian Dream for the first time. I'm like, well, that's a song I'm going to be listening to over and over and over again for years and years and years. Not just a song that I'm like, that's sick, cool, and then it kind of gets lost in your Spotify liked, if you know what I mean. So, I mean, the power of the art and the power of that music is so palpable. And also, I think it's music that more of Australia needs to be hearing, and we need to have that opportunity to reflect and to reflect on who we are and what we are, and not just kind of bubblegum our way through these things, which I suppose is very much a part of the song. But yeah, it kind of all rolls together in that way.
Yeah. Look, and they're not all. I think like Possum and Taking on Water are examples of more straight down the line tunes, and at the same as I love writing those, I guess more like complex songs, and like they're structurally a bit strange, and maybe they go for a long time, and maybe there's not like a definitive chorus or whatever there is. I still like also the challenge of writing like a more straight up and down rock song too. Like Taking on Water is probably the closest thing to a conventional song. And that was like, that's a challenge in itself. And like, that took ages to get there, man. I went through like, holy shit, there'd be like 35 versions of Taking on Water. But all the bits were there and I liked it, but could just never get it to work. Sam, the bass guitarist, ended up seeing the structure of that song as it currently is. So, yeah, I think just writing music, and I adore doing that. We were just in the studio last week with some new stuff, and like it's the best. It's like the best place to be of all time, like you never have much time, so you just kind of like you're in a fever, and that creates inspiration and that creates tension, and a lot can happen in a short time.
While we're focusing on individual tracks, I also it's probably not a world record or something like that, but in my head, it has to be, well, you're only one off. Big Fuck Small, the first track on the album, the second word on that song is fuck. And like, you have to be close. Like, you're obviously, at worst, one word off setting the record for the earliest fuck in an album playthrough.
I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. Yeah. Shit.
Maybe you should have,
That is an
renamed it
early
to
fuck, isn't it?
Fuck Big Small or something.
It is an
But
early
it sets the tone, I think, for the album. Just fuck really early, and you go, okay, strap
Yeah.
in.
It was either gonna open or close the record. I think that was the only place we could imagine it. Yeah, God, that song was it was written, I reckon, 10 days before we recorded. Total accident, that tune, but we all love it. Um, that and Pillar of Smoke were kind of, I think they excited us because they were the most different sounding tunes in a way, or like they kind of were opening a door to a new place a little bit. That I think excited all of us to go, oh, what's down that path? That's fun. It's different. There's some synths in there and some weird guitars, some weird time signatures, and yeah. So they were good songs to. We love those ones in particular.
And do you see, is that kind of the doorway that you're walking through when you're talking about the music that you were in the studio the other day recording? Is that the direction you're kind of going to go on for the next project?
Not quite. I don't know. It felt that way. So I mean, after saying all that, it did feel that way when we were in there because we were just frothing on those ones. But then, likewise, Australian Dream, I think we were really interested in something which was a little. I mean, they're so hard to write those songs, but like, I know, and obviously nothing like Australian Dream. But I think that sound excited us because that was a new world as well, where it was acoustic guitar, but then it did have that. Um, it still had the rock and roll in it, and we're like, that's a really nice dynamic to play with. And somebody like Paul Kelly, of course, and like a million people do that beautifully and really well. There's still rock and roll, but it's acoustic led. Bad Dreams do it well as well with some of their half ballady ones. So that was exciting us. But then, funnily enough, like the new ones that came out were like, I mean, they're all over the shop, and there's about an album's worth there. But the ones we recorded were kind of a little bit emo, man. They're kind of neither here nor there. They're in their own little space. They're actually kind of Can't quite work it out. It's like somewhere between Fugazi and something for Kate or something. I don't know. It's out there.
The curiosity is
Yeah.
peaked then.
Yeah. I'll get them out soon, I reckon. Like, so a couple of songs will come out before the year's out of the newer ones, which is exciting.
Well, the foreshadowing is there for that one. We are mentioned before, and I suppose I speak to this as much as you're comfortable. I don't know exactly what went on, but this is an album with you as kind of the only Pretty Littles member that was on the previous 6 albums, as I understand it. So you've had a lineup shift of 3 members. How did that, in terms of kind of making that work for a new album so well, as it sounds from the outside at least? How did that all go about, and how did you make that work?
Yeah. Oh wow. I mean, it was so challenging, but that's one of the great results. The band, the Pretty Littles, was slowly slowing. It was coming to a stop. We could all feel it. Like we'd reached this peak, and we were clearly in a bit of a valley, which I think for some of the fellas, Gulzar, Boydie, and Boozer, um, I think that the drive and the fun of it all was we were getting old. There was a change of life thing happening. We're entering 30s, and kids were kind of coming into it, and weddings, and I think that drive that you need to want to rehearse and tour and do all those things, it was changing, and we'd stop catching up to write. It was more just like there was a show coming up, so we'd catch up to rehearse and go through the set, and then we'd play it. So there wasn't this great creative exchange by the end, and uh, that was fine, I think, for most of us. And I was kind of, you go through waves of going like, oh, this is great, this is fine, it's still there. I don't want to push anyone because I don't want anyone to leave. So this is just the way it's going to be, and that's cool. Maybe that's just the way that it is. Um, and then I think I went on one of the tours, was called Small Town Big Sound. That was the one with Animal Sniffers and Bad Dreams and things like that. It was just after the first lockdown. We'd put Weekend Away out in 2020. Lockdown, it was what lockdown came at a great time. I kind of loved it. And then we ran this tour, and I started seeing these bands like Bad Dreams and Animal and Sniffers and Floodlights, who were just starting out. And I was just got so envious because I could see that they were lifers, and they had the fire. And um, I think it was such an amazing time after that forced break, because I think I realized what a privilege it is to play in a band and to perform in front of people. And I'd lost that kind of perspective. It had become a bit of a drag, and so that was back. And I just said to the boys, like I want to keep going, and I want to keep rehearsing and writing and touring and doing all the stuff that a band does. And if you're in, let's do it. But if you're not feeling that, then let's just kind of acknowledge it. And all the boys just said like, yeah, no, we're not. That's not where we're at, but go for it. And so it was this really beautiful, like, I mean, that is the abridged version. It was like this stunning, terribly sad moment of, acknowledgement and love, and what a time, and, fucking heartbreaking, but beaut. And we're all still great mates. But I think after that, it was going like that they gave me the blessing to keep the band name, but I just felt so deeply uncomfortable by that. And I'd seen other bands do it, and it just looked sad, and I didn't like seeing when it was just one member. And so we ended up playing 2 shows. Goulder couldn't even play those shows. I think he was having a baby, so John and Colliver came and played bass. But we played these 2 final shows. It was meant to be the Weekend Away launch. 2 shows at the Tote. And then I went off and started other bands. I put out a solo EP. I started Dumb Punts. I started Dolmarties with the boys that are in the band now, and I started um, Money God Band. I think after all that, like I just realized that, people were still listening to the Littles, and I was feeling weird because I didn't want to say goodbye to all the songs, but playing them under other band names felt a bit odd. It was just such a time of like fucking the worst self-reflection and sadness because I couldn't see a way I couldn't work out how to do it. And I know it sounds like, potentially dramatic and all those things, but in your little world, it's kind of everything. It's like I've lost my vehicle, I've lost my identity, and I've lost all these things. And what the fuck do I do? This is so sad. Um, And then I think I just went, fuck it. Like I'd just written Force, and I was like, that's a little song. Like I don't know how, but I'm going to put that out under the littles. And I called Boozer and I said, will you play drums on these two songs? I got Full Hearts and I got Force. I'm going to book a day with Greg. Would you just come in and just play drums? And like I'd written the drums more or less, and we'd done a bit of collaboration. And then yeah, so he came in and I just played everything on Force and Full Hearts, and he played the drums, and I did it all with Greg, and I just went, great. I'm not dependent on anyone. I'm so grateful to Boozer. I think he felt sorry for me. It was just like, fucking hell, I've got to do this for him. And then in the end, I kind of convinced him to stay in the band for a bit because the Neighborhood Youth boys, the three new fellas, they all played in this band called Neighborhood Youth, and we had so few bands that were friends with in music. Really, we didn't really like. We were kind of a bit awkward and nervous, and like we weren't really outgoing, and like I don't know what it was. We just didn't make heaps of mates in music, and Neighborhood Youth was just like. I mean, not we made some good friends, but like Neighborhood Youth in particular was just like fucking instant. We toured heaps together. We loved their music. We loved them as people. Sammy would fill in on bass occasionally, and so there was just a great connection there. And their band was kind of winding up too. It was kind of ending a dormant period, and so Boozer was in the band. Then Jenkins played from Neighborhood Youth came over. Sam from Neighborhood Youth came over. So it was like two Littles members, two Neighborhood Youth members, and I knew Boozer was like reluctant, but he stuck in there. We played a few shows together, got some merch made. We had a t-shirt. I think we played like 4 shows together or something. And then Boozer just said, mate, like I'm fucking, I don't know how we're back here again, but like I'm so done. And I was like, yep, nah, I knew that was coming. So then JP, who was the singer in Neighborhood Youth and was a great drummer, he joined. So by that stage, I was just like, fuck it. Like, this is a hill to die on. I'll die on this hill. I couldn't think of three other people if it wasn't going to be the boys I started doing it with. And it's like the closest possible thing. And then they've brought their whole new, those three have been playing music for so long. So they're so connected. Watching them write together is just mesmerizing. They're great singers. It's the first time we've had like harmonies in the band, and they're just such different players. So it's really interesting seeing the effect it has on the music. So it's yeah, I'm just that feeling of like complete and utter like where the fuck am I to where we are now. It's yeah, crazy to be here because it was grim.
Yeah, it's interesting that change of perspective, like for you, the pandemic put into perspective of, oh no, I really like creating music and creating art and this outlet that I have available to me. This is really important to me. I want to pursue it. Where some of the other guys were going, oh, I've got a family or, whatever the case is. I guess the music, I've lived without it now throughout COVID, and I'm happy to sort of see that continue and, pick up other. So the different perspective shifts changed, but it was all as a result of the pandemic, which is wild that was 5 years ago. Like, where has that time gone?
I know.
Oh.
It's crazy to think about. But yeah, you're right, man. I think the pandemic was such it was such a great moment for people to whatever it was, like it got me out. I was a lawyer in those days, a pretty unhappy lawyer, so it got me gave me an opportunity to get out of that, which maybe I wouldn't have taken otherwise. And I think, yeah, I think I didn't even really have the confidence to call myself a musician for a really long time, or felt like I didn't feel like I deserved a seat at the table. And I had some like, confidence issues around all of that. And, it's a complete waste of time really, but I just didn't have, I think that's what COVID gave me. It was like, I mean, if I'm not a musician, then what am I, And I kind of came out of that with like a real sense of that's what you've been doing it for 10 years. Like what more, what are you're waiting for like somebody from like the guild to come up to you with a certificate and say, here you go, you've done it. You can call yourself, it's just like, it was just a moment where I went like, no, I'm like, this is just part of me. It's in me, and that's the same with the boys who are in the band now. I think they're just, and it becomes like footy training, it becomes like something where or if you're into golf or cycling or whatever you're into, it becomes this thing now where we're older and the time that you got to find for it is more of a fight, but it makes it so much more rewarding. And you hang out and you're working on something which is using your brain, and you're having a dart and a beer, and that's fun. And you go on one tour a year, and the odd show, and you put an album out, or what, it just becomes this kind of this thing which is something that's beautiful that to do with your time, and your friends. So yeah, COVID was a fucking crazy one, wasn't it? What a time.
It was, but it's genuinely beautiful to hear how that all went. It sounds like the kind of healthiest and most beautiful divorce and then new marriage that you could possibly imagine for the band there. Like I can understand how you were like, no, this is right, with the way all of those cards fell. And I suppose the proof's in the pudding with Force.
Yeah, yeah. It was just a period of total uncertainty, but the way that it all resolved. I mean, the breakup was so amicable, it was almost a pain in the ass because you couldn't really be angry at anyone. You know how you might want to, you kind of wanted to be angry a bit, but really the overwhelming feeling was that it was just so beaut, you know. And we're all still close, we don't see each other as much, but we've still got the old thread alive and things like that. But yeah, for it to be where it is with the new fellas and to have played so much music together, it's yeah, it really was, yeah, the sort of the best case scenario. And there was so much crossover between our two bands. I think like people that like Neighbourhood Youth were into Littles, and we just toured so much, and vice versa. Um, but they were just, and then we've got these opposing styles, like Littles and Neighbourhood Youth started at the same time. We put out fucking every song that we ever wrote, and they put out sort of one EP and one album, despite writing all these amazing songs. So there's clearly a difference in approach there, which is funny to navigate at times.
You mentioned touring,
Fuck
and
it.
you are touring this new album now. Quite a few dates on the tour. We're talking about, regional tours, and you're certainly hitting up a few regional areas on this one. Most relative to us here on the Central Coast will either be on Friday the 28th of March, that one's at King Street in Newcastle, or at the Marrickville Bolo in Sydney on Saturday the 29th of March. But yeah, all up and down the East Coast. You're in Adelaide, you're in Fremantle as well. So there's plenty of stops on this tour. You excited to be hitting the road again and playing these new tracks? Seems like a dumb question.
For sure. No, we're pumped. I mean, it's such a mountain of work, and I can't believe we've got Fremantle on the fucking. We played one show in Fremantle before. It was such a well. I mean, we played with Smith Street last year, which was sick. It was a big venue, and playing a Smith Street tour is just rent a crowd and heaps of crossover, which is sick. So, but we've only ever played one headliner in Fremantle, which just costs an absolute mint getting there. Anyway, we're going to Mojo's this time, and copping a lot of heat from the Tasmanians and the Canberrians. And I'm like, guys, we should have. But it's good to go to Freo, and unless something remarkable happens, it'll probably be the last time I get over there. But Newcastle, we haven't played a headliner in since Skeleton Run album. I think we're at the Cambo, the little room of the Cambo those days. And yeah, Bangalore for the first time. Brisbane's the biggest venue. Marrickville Bolo will be the biggest venue in Sydney. And it's an epic, and the corner show in Melbourne's just super exciting. So yeah, they're a bit of a pain in the ass because I've sort of got to do all that booking and planning and all that sort of shit. But that's just part of the deal. And once you get out on the road, it's the best. It's our tour. So I don't know when we'll get out on the road next. It'll be a fucking long time, I reckon.
So let that be the motivation to go snap up the tickets while you got the chance, because you might not be catching the Pretty Littles for a while since. But we do hope it's less than 5 years between albums and drinks and tours from this one. It is very, very good to have you back, though, making music and releasing music and touring again. So, Jack, thank you so much for jumping on and chatting with us and unpacking it all. You've been very generous with your perspective, very generous with your time too. It's so nice when we get guests on like you who are ready to just open the book. So really appreciate that, and we will see you out on the road as you tour Force.
But thanks for having me, fellas. It's been a pleasure.
fast facts about this episode. It was produced by the one and only magical man Cameron Smith. It featured that artist or music personality that you just heard speak for a while. It was recorded on Darkinjung Land. And for more from us, head to www.homebrewed.au. Bye.
While we're talking about
connecting very well, and
individual-
I'd argue it's. Damn it, we did it again. Fuck, sorry. This edit's going to be so much fun.
You go.